Thinking Aloud. Conversations on the leading edge of knowledge and discovery with psychologist Jeffrey Mishlove.
Hello and welcome. I'm Jeffrey Mishlove. Our topic today is African ritual and initiation. With me is Malidoma Patrice Some, a shaman of the Dagara people from the country of Bakiri Faso in West Africa, formerly the Upper Volta. Malidoma possesses 2 doctoral degrees from the Sorbonne and from Brandeis University in political science and in literature, and he is the author of a couple of books including Ritual, Power Healing and Community, and Of Water and the Spirit. Welcome, Malidoma.
Thank you for having me here.
It is a pleasure to be with you. You are a man of several worlds. In fact, your name itself expresses a sense of the purpose for which you were born. Mm-hmm. And perhaps we could begin our discussion of the Dagara culture by talking about your birth and the way in which this knowledge of your mission actually preceded your birth.
It's a common belief and a common practice among the Dagara that the birth of a person is the destination of a soul's journey into this world, from the world of the spirit, which people regard as also the world of the ancestors. And so usually when in the village a woman is pregnant, there is a ritual that is performed, preferably during the 2nd month of the pregnancy, which they call the hearing ritual. The purpose of it is first to find out the identity of the incoming soul that is supposed to be in the dressing room, putting on carefully a body. Mm-hmm. And to eventually find out what the purpose of the journey itself into the tribe is exactly, so that this information can be utilized in the design of the particular name as well as the appropriate preparation for the birth itself. Mm-hmm. And so apparently what I communicated to the elders while still in the womb of my mother was that I was coming into the world in order to be a voice on behalf of the values of the village. And the name Malidoma that was given to me at birth was like an encapsulation of the kind of mission that I had communicated to the elder, namely my grandfather, through the mouth of my mother.
In other words, your mother was put into a trance state.
She was. She's in a trance state. The few times that I've participated in this ritual, what I've seen was that the mother always takes on a very shrilled voice, very acute tone, and speaks rather fast without her lip moving. Mm. And of course, the language is very difficult to pick. I believe that it takes some training, and this is probably why the elders are the only one that conduct this kind of ritual. So it takes some training to actually understand the semantics of this kind of language. Mm-hmm. Yes.
And your name means one who becomes a friend to the stranger.
That's correct.
Or enemy.
Uh-huh. This is because the word stranger or enemy are the same. Mm-hmm. You never know in a stranger whether you're dealing with a friend or a foe. Mm-hmm. And so the same word is utilized for the same designation. Mm-hmm. So the name itself is supposed to be a constant reminder of what I'm here to do. Mm-hmm. And that's the same thing for everybody in the village, so that each time someone calls you by your name, it's like that person is reminding you of what you're here to do. Mm-hmm.
Because your people also believe that as you grow up, you lose your memory of your contact with the world of the ancestors, and you may forget your mission.
There is a complexity associated with growth, and that complexity comes with the constant toll taken by the body as it expands. Mm-hmm. And so growth is connected, therefore, to forgetting. which is the reason why something has to be done in order to reconnect the person who is grown up to his or her memory. You know? And that's the reason why also children are constantly monitored, but not by the direct parent necessarily or alone, but by the entire village, because they are the gift of the village, which is the reason why you will see every day, for instance, the village, after sunset, children start to sniff around from house to house to find out where the best kitchen smell is coming from and decide where they're going to have dinner based on that information. You know.
Well, I have a sense that among the Dagara people there is a real concern with the soul, the evolution of the soul or spirit of each person who is born into that village.
That's correct.
I would imagine a sense of some kind of purpose of the Dagara people themselves.
Yes, that's true. This, the function of the soul is extremely carefully examined, because the soul is not an entity that has a start and an end. The soul is in constant orbital mode between the land of the ancestors and the land of the tribe. And so what happened is that the general impression that they give to the soul is that it goes to the ancestor in order to recharge itself and to build up a purpose or a plan, then takes on a spacesuit, enters the cosmos, into the tribe, execute that mission, then return back to brief or debrief among the ancestors, and to receive again new charges, new mission to be performed here.
Now, of course, in the Western world, there is some small amount of scientific interest in this question of the nature of the soul and the nature of other dimensions with which we interact. And in some cultures, like the Tibetan culture, there's a very evolved knowledge. But I sense that in your community, the Dagara people have also developed a highly evolved working relationship between the world of the tribe and the world of the ancestors.
In fact, that's a kind of rhythm, that is a spiritual rhythm that the village live by. In other words, it determines the whole cultural fabric, and as well as the nature of the interaction between member of the same village, member of the same tribe, etc. Because the kind of respect which is given to the soul is the same as the respect that is given to the ancestor, because soul means an ageless entity that is preparing itself to bring a substantial contribution to the betterment, to the stability of a community, a given community. In this case, it's either a village or an entire tribe. And so therefore, the one thing that people get interested in is not so much the physical constitution, but the containment, or what is contained within that physical appearance. Because that is the one that contains the truth, the information that lead to the exact identity of the kind of physical appearance that we have in front of us.
You even write about, in a very interesting way, in reference to your grandfather, who was your teacher when you were a child, about how sometimes he would take on a very smelly characteristic. He wouldn't wash, and he would cultivate really pungent, powerful odors around him. And this was related to maintaining the purity of the souls.
In fact, that's true. The ancestral land is recognizable by an attractive smell.
It's unattractive.
An attractive smell.
Yes.
And anything that smells bad, in other words, is something that is reminiscent of the proximity of such a world. Therefore, it is not uncommon to see elders who, therefore, are said to be moving slowly towards embarking for that world. to actually do their own dress rehearsal in terms of scent, negligence of physical appearance, simply because of the gradual greater and greater focus on matters pertaining to the soul.
Yes.
And of course, those of us who are still in the growing process find that quite repulsive,
Yes.
to say the least. And that translates, of course, the difference between the young and inexperienced human being as opposed to the one that has almost completed his journey and is about to go on and join hand with the ancestors.
And well, it's just the opposite of sort of the conventional wisdom that cleanliness is next to godliness.
Well, that's right. That's right. You know, there's room here, of course, to at least admit to the fact that, you know, what is embraced by one culture can be seen as upside down in another culture. And in my village, of course, the tendency for the elders, of course, to be very cold in front of very correct physical appearance translates the fact that that appearance is more connected to a desire to stick around here, to stick around in this area, than a desire to actually show attraction toward the other world.
Yes.
See?
Now, your grandfather, who was your teacher, was also considered, would you say, a magician or a healer, a wise man? All of these things, I
Well, it's
guess.
actually, all of these things combined. You know, titles are very hard to come by in the village itself. But he was seen as one of the depository of the values of the ancestors, the values of the tribe. He performed a lot of healings on a daily basis on people, some of whom were coming from pretty far away, outside of the tribal limits, the village limits with most of the case. But he was also a person who was very versed in what I would call the science of magic, who knew how to surveil, for instance, the farm from his room. The farm was 8 miles away. And at night, for some reason, he had forgotten to sleep. And he would sit there and look through a clay pot full of water. And while you would see water, he would see the whole picture of the farm. And that, of course, if you want to look at it from a purely Western point of view, that's magical.
It's like crystal gazing.
Well, that's right, it's like crystal gazing. But it's also something that is based on certain subtle knowledge that only maybe a healer, a medicine man, and of course, a priest of the traditional world is expected to know and to be able to demonstrate. Not publicly, but at least to show that these are the means by which he assumed his responsibilities.
You've written that among the Dagara people, there many different esoteric arts were practiced, and there were many different esoteric societies, each promoting a different specialized practice, and that although the tribal group was very open to accepting these things, it was very important that the esoteric practices be kept secret.
That's right. This is because of the belief that is common in the village, that the hidden is alive and potent. In order to maintain power, I mean true power, that power must be hidden. You must surround that power with a great deal of secrecy. And therefore, disclosure of power was signs that that power was in the process of decay.
Yes.
So for some reason, becoming visible, or what they call entering the visible realm, was signs of sudden, gradual erosion. Now, indeed, those different sources of knowledge that were that would currently practiced or exhibited in the village were done so by different group of people who sometimes would be in competition with one another. But that competition was mostly expressed in terms of how thick a veil of secrecy surrounded their power. But within this different magical association, if I may use that term, there was a certain kind of innate knowledge of the other having something that the one need. And so there was this constant spying of one another for a little bit of the secret that the other possessed. So it's really a very complex situation, because one never knows what is going on under the water. On the surface, everything looks fine, but underneath, where all the powers are wielded and played around, was an extremely complex world indeed.
One of the most interesting public displays of not only this power, but I think of the life of the whole tribal community in which you grew up, you've written about in the context of your grandfather's funeral, and I wonder if you would share that.
That's correct. The funeral, the importance of a funeral comes primarily from the fact that, and the belief that it takes human tears in order to send a deceased person to the land of the ancestors. The going to the land of the ancestors happens in on a liquid surface. That liquid surface, mostly salty, must be provided by human beings. So the village gathered together to shed as much tears as possible in order to help drain the spirit of the deceased person to the land of the ancestors.
Yes.
And towards the end of that massive grief ritual, what happened is that there is a display of the kind of power that the deceased person was associated with prior to his death. And that's what I was really privileged to witness at a very young age in the case of my grandfather's funeral. Which was extremely touching. At first, you see, seen from the point of view of a boy, there was nothing new or strange about it.
You had no reason to think that these
That's
things
right.
Weren't normal occurrences.
That's exactly the situation. But later on, what happened is that I begun to realize, as I grew to understand, there's a duality in the world.
Yes.
The physical world, the spiritual world, the natural world, the supernatural world. That indeed, these forces, even though they were there being displayed in that manner, in a ritual space, that disclosure does not disempower the things disclosed. See? And what I noticed was, for instance, for the first time, the public usage of this power that my grandfather used to be the depository of, which is called the pintul. Pintul, or in English, the upside down arrow, which my grandfather used to shoot from the secret of his medicine room. And he would go out and do exactly what he's supposed to do, namely kill an animal that is ravaging the farm.
This would be an invisible arrow.
An invisible arrow that only materializes on contact with the body, and then will return to its source for cleansing and rearming, so to speak. You see? And for the first time, when it appeared during the funeral, it was like a shooting star, moving exactly so fast that it was rather difficult to follow with the eyes. But the whistling and the extreme noise that it was making as it was cutting through the air kind of held everybody's breath in suspension.
Yes.
And that was really the first time I saw something more like a demonstration of the hidden power of a village or a tribe, to say the least. The other thing was the return into the village of those beings that were referred to in the village as contemplates, who are usually little humanoid looking, mostly with a lot of hair, red in their look, but extremely powerful. I had heard them being mentioned by my grandfather over and over as the real teachers of Dagara magic and medicine, but I had never seen them personally.
These would be the equivalent of the European idea of dwarves or fairies or
leprechaun,
something of that sort.
That's something of that sort. And indeed, in fact, later on, as I became more and more acquainted with them, I realized that small size is only an illusion. because I remember the first time I came face to face with one of them, I was so scared that I climbed out of a tree. It was either I was hallucinating or something, but the thing just grew as tall as a tree. Of course, that led me to a greater confusion and greater terror, so eventually I fainted. But when I woke up, of course, I was not at the same place. What had happened, I never knew. And so that led me to the strong belief that these people show themselves in that small form in order to show humility, or the need to not display power or to keep it concealed in the, by looking a certain way that is not threatening. See?
Now, I have to ask you, as a man of two cultures, and you've written about how painful it is to be really neither fully part of your tribal community nor fully part of the Western community, but you've had 2 doctoral degrees and a chance to reflect on these very unusual experiences from the perspective of more education than most Westerners will ever have.
Well, that education, you should know, was it happened out of the necessity of responding to some kind of insecurity that I was feeling, the insecurity of not knowing eventually how I was going to be friends with a stranger. The fact that I was facing a huge task of translating indigenous reality into a language which is mostly hostile to these realities, or these realities that are constantly resisting entry into a foreign language. I found myself thinking that the many more degrees I have, maybe the better off in the area of eventually finding a place of reconciliation between language and the realities such as these magical things that needed to be communicated.
I imagine there were times when you might have doubted your own experiences.
Oh, more often than not, of course. I was in this position where I felt like I was constantly in an analytical mode as far as these materials are concerned. First, because it felt to me that the rationality of my own education was a compelling imperative to be as logical as possible, to try to make these magical things become logically explicable, as if that was the only way for me to get it across to the modern person.
Yes.
But then I realized that this was a situation in which I was sweating quite profusely because of these things not wanting to be torn apart and dissected in that particular way.
Yes.
So what happened is that in the end, I decided that it was just a matter of just presenting them as they are and letting the other person utilize a different area of himself or herself in order to approach them. I used to remember, I used to recall my elders telling me to think with my heart. And if my mind is bothering me, to try to feel with my mind. And that led me to the understanding of why in the village they say that truth resides in the belly, not in the mind. And that when truth wants to come out, it is respect to truth to allow it to come out the way truth wants to come out. And so that's when I discovered that the sweating I was experiencing was in fact the direct result of my wanting to actually fit this reality into a strictly explicable, in other words, almost scientific mode, because I felt or I thought that that was the only way these things could be translated.
Well, it sounds to me, from what you're saying, and maybe I'm more open-minded than many people, but probably not, that your culture, the Dagara people, have developed ways of knowing that are in their own domain far in advance of what we in the West understand, and that we really have much to learn from the people who you represent.
Well, I think that learning and openness to this reality is the beginning primarily of discovering this thing inside the self. It is not that the Dagara people have developed something that looks much more advanced than what the West has opted to develop instead. It is that the Dagara people have managed to continue upholding these memories, memories of the deep past, which include all these magical things that they have been able to bring back to the present and to journey with into the future, as opposed to a situation in which the pressure of modernity forcing someone to focus on a limited number of things, and therefore shortening one's horizon, and hoping therefore that perhaps this clear focus is eventually going to lead to the same magical thing, when in fact it's a matter of self-expansion. Narrowing the self does not lead to expansion. It leads to more narrowness, and so forth. What I call claustration.
Claustration.
So, you know, in this case, of course, there is something that the indigenous world, the Dagara people, can certainly teach the modern culture, which is, for the acquisition of these wonderful things, one must look into the past, not into the future. Just like, for instance, you can reach west by going east. You just have to go far enough.
Yes.
But if you were to choose the most economic way to go west, you're going to turn facing west instead of going east. You see, in the same way, instead of trying to grab the tail of the past by jumping into the future, it would be just better to just turn around and face the past itself, because it's not that far behind.
Well, Malidoma Patrice Some, it's been a pleasure sharing this half hour with you. It has gone so fast.
It's true.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for being with me.
Absolutely. Thank you.
And thank you for being with us.